Womp womp. There's the advice there. No.
He was a rascal.
A rascal?
He was a rascal.
What are you, 80? Well, hey everyone, Luke and Savannah here, and we are so excited to be talking about love, dating, sex, relationships, friendships, kind of wherever you're at in this season. You know, maybe you're just looking for improvements with your friendships, your relationships. Maybe you're single, you want to date, you're dating, you want to get engaged, or engaged, you want to get married. Wherever you're at in that whole walk with relationships, we just kind of want to speak to it. We don't have a ton of experience. We've got some. We've been together now in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, on and off for 10 years. You guys know what we're talking about. On, off, maybe we want to be together, maybe we don't.
Yep. In high school, not now.
Not
We're
now,
committed
not
now. We're committed now.
Yeah, we said yes.
We said yes.
We figured it out.
You don't get to quit after you say yes. But I mean, so much of high school is you're figuring life out, you're figuring yourself out, you're figuring each other out.
Even college, I feel like you're figuring out everything with your career. Who do you want to be? Where do you want to go? And to make those decisions with another person can be really overwhelming. So hopefully, like Luke said, we don't have a whole lot of experience. We've been married for almost 4 years now, so not a long time, but long enough to maybe help you guys navigate some of these seasons. And you guys actually submitted questions to the Instagram. We've got them down here,
Look at
right
this.
here.
My goodness, so we figured we'd have a little bit of fun and do some Google autofill questions. Can we do that? A little autofill action?
You
Okay.
go first.
I'm gonna start this sucker off. All right, here we go. Do I peel it?
Yeah, you go.
Okay, here we go. It's a
it?
long one. Is it okay to pursue a relationship with someone if they don't go to the same church or if they don't go to church at all?
Womp womp.
All right. Womp womp. There's the advice there. No. Man, I think let's break it down just a little bit. I think if somebody doesn't go to the same church at all, let's start with that one because I think that's a little easier to answer that question. The goal of dating is what? To get married, right? You know, the goal of dating is to really test compatibility. I think sometimes in church culture, the moment you start dating someone or even talking to somebody, there's so much pressure where you're like, oh my God, so-and-so and so-and-so are talking. It's like, can we not just start throwing labels on everything right away? Like the whole purpose of dating is to test compatibility.
Right.
You're 16, 17, 18, 19. You don't know if you want to spend the rest of your life with that person. It might take some dates. It might take some time of conversation, of getting to know each other, talking about values, talking about family dynamics, talking about goals in life, that you might get through some dates, a couple months even of dating, and realize that, hey, they're not a bad person, I'm not a bad person here, no one's done anything wrong, but the compatibility component just isn't there. And I think we can just be okay with sometimes dating and not working out. Like, I think we can be okay with that. But if the purpose of dating and being in a relationship is ultimately for marriage, eventually you're going to be one. The Bible says that the two shall become one. That's what God joins together, no one can separate. So when that happens, where are you going to be planted? It's impractical for you to be planted in two different places. Right. David tells us in Psalms 1 that the life of a righteous person looks like a tree that's planted by rivers of living water. So we are to be planted. It's not God's design to be in this church one day and this church another day. Right. So my encouragement would be, man, if you feel like God has planted you somewhere, then you need to honor where God has planted you. You know, if God has put you under the spiritual covering of a house, under the spiritual covering of a certain family, then you are to honor that. And I think that's a decision you should make prior to dating. That should be one of the conversations that you have in that compatibility stage of dating before the relationship really becomes super serious.
The talking stage.
The talking stage, I like that. We're not in a relationship,
we're just talking.
But those are important conversations to have, and I think that you need to be able to determine if this relationship is really valuable, then you need to go maybe where they're planted, or they need to come where you're planted. If they're not really planted where they're at, now that leads to the second part of this question. If they don't go to church at all, Paul tells us, 2 Corinthians 6:14, says, do not be unequally yoked. That means don't be unequally yoked. Don't be paired up with somebody that's not a believer. He says, for what purpose does righteousness have with lawlessness? They can't go together. A yoke, was a farming tool that they would put two oxen together on, and they would plow a field. But if you were to be unequally yoked, like if you were to take an oxen and a donkey and put them together, what would end up happening? Instead of the plow going forward and operating in the manner in which it was created to, what would happen? It would just go in circles. that sucker would just spin and spin and spin and go nowhere. When you're unequally yoked, when you're partnered up, tethered to somebody that is not a believer, can I tell you, that's a picture of what life looks like. You go nowhere. You don't go anywhere great in life. And ultimately, I've seen many people fall short of the plans that God has for them because they pair up, partner with, tie themselves to. It doesn't even have to be a relationship. This doesn't just refer to dating. I've seen great young men and young women of God fall out of church and fall out of the plans that God has for them simply because they didn't take into account who their friends were, who their close friends were. I'm talking about who the people were that influenced them, that they confided in, those solid inner circle of friends. Those have got to be believers. Not that we look down on other people. No, not at all. Not even in the slightest. In fact, Jesus wants us to go and reach those that are lost, hurting, and broken and bring them into the fold. So we don't cast people out. We don't criticize and be harsh and just heap judgment on them. But we do have standards for the people that we need to allow into our lives. And you should have standards for who you date. The number one question I always ask somebody, oh, I'm dating somebody new. That's awesome. That's awesome. Do they love Jesus? Well, no. Yeah, what is that?
Well,
no, but maybe they could. Odds are they're going to pull you out of church before you pull them in. The best way that you can lead somebody to Jesus is to not be in an intimate relationship with them. Love them, be there for them, invite them, get them around the things of God. A good example of that when you and I first met. I mean, you can speak to this because when we first met, I was not saved. And you knew that. I mean, why don't you even talk about that perspective?
Yeah, so we actually met after Bash and a bunch of
2012,
friends.
2012, over 10 years ago.
Half of you probably weren't even born. Just kidding. No, but we met in 2012 and we had a group of mutual friends and we all went out after, and I remember meeting Luke and instantly I went home and told my dad that this was the funniest person I'd ever met.
Score!
And I had a huge crush on Luke, and I kind of just remember asking around, what's this guy like? Who are his friends? What's he up to? And he was a rascal.
He was a rascal. What are you, 80?
He was up to no good. And so I kind of just had to make this decision, if this was something that God ultimately wanted for my life, he was gonna do the work in Luke's heart on his time. It wasn't up to me to fix.
That's good.
And so I just kind of made the commitment that okay, if we have mutual friends, then I'll be around. I'll be his friend. If he wants to tell me about his day or if we want to go do something with friends, then I'll do that. If he has questions about church or if he wants to come help me with something at church, I'll let him do that. But I'm not going to let him into the like Luke said, the more private areas of my life, or speak into my spiritual life or my involvement in church, or I'm not going to let his voice be over my parents or my friends or people who had more just more years on them, more proven time. And so I kind of just waited. And I think a lot of times, especially when you're young, the waiting game feels like forever. And you think that 2 months is enough time or 3 months is enough time. I waited 2 years before I really felt like Luke was in a place spiritually, emotionally, mentally ready to take on a relationship. And even then we had our stuff to work through. And I think any good relationship takes work. But I mean, at the end of the day, we just had to make sure that we were both in a healthy place, because if we weren't in a healthy place on our own, we were never going to be in a healthy place together. So, yeah.
Very well said. Very well said. Why don't you, come on, take it away. Go and get that next question there. Rip that thing off, girl.
Okay. How do I keep God at the center of my relationships? That's actually a really good segue from that. Okay, keeping God at the center of your relationship. A lot of times people think that means should we be praying together? Should we read our Bible together? Should we study together? And I think some people might tell you yes. I'm not gonna tell you that. I'm actually gonna say no, and here's why. I think that you should make sure that the Lord is the center of your life, and your person should make sure that the Lord is the center of their life. And so I'm going to use this as an example. If I go to the gym every single day, and if Luke goes to the gym every single day, and we end up talking about our day together, naturally the gym is going to come up. We're going to talk about what workout we did. We're going to talk about how much it sucked that day, or how sore our arms are, or whatever that is. Same thing when it comes to the things of God. If you are keeping God a priority in your personal life, and your partner is keeping the Lord a priority in their personal life, it's going to come up naturally. You're going to talk about what you're praying for. You're going to talk about what God is speaking to you. You're going to talk about what you're reading, and it's going to naturally just fuel really good conversation. And you'll notice that this is a topic that begins to come up daily. So how do you keep the Lord at the center of your relationship? Keep the Lord as the center of your life, because you are going to live that out every single day. When you're reading your Bible, you're going to live that out. When you're talking to God daily, He's going to be speaking to you daily, and you're going to live that out. So I just think like that's the biggest thing, is you don't have to, it's not a together thing. I accepted Jesus long before I ever met Luke, and Luke accepted Jesus before we were ever together. And so that relationship is personal. It's not a shared relationship. Again, we share what God is doing uniquely in our lives. And there are things that He calls us to together now that we're married. But I think as long as you are single, in the sense not married, then that needs to be a personal commitment and a personal priority, and the rest falls into place.
Very well said.